Hello there, and welcome back to the show, World War II Books Where to Start. I'm your host, General Mark Clark, on my way to Rome. But before I get there, I thought I'd stop off and do a little press conference about general histories of World War II. So here we go. Now, I started this channel on the premise that most people don't want to wade through a general history of World War II as their first submersion into the topic, as it's too much with too many names, maps, places, dates, overwhelming, confusing, and ultimately a jumble if you're not familiar with any of the individual stories or smaller scale stuff to help you get into the topic. But having done this for a while now, I'm going to throw some general histories at you for when you're ready for it. What would be the best ones or most approachable ones to tackle? So here we go. We'll start off with the Second World War by Anthony Beevor. Pretty basic title, kind of says it all. And that cover was kind of a real screamer, isn't it? See that in the bookstore, it's going to stand out. You know the old saw about you win when you've made it as an author because your name is bigger than the title of the book. Well, apparently Beevor has not made that status in America yet. But anyway, this cover, well, it's indicative, but it doesn't really grab the attention other than, oh my God, what is that? So over the course of 783 pages from 2012, it's going to tell you all about it. He kind of frames it in the beginning as a clash of ideologies worldwide. Okay, fair enough. Doesn't follow up on that. Doesn't really give you any explanatory exposition paragraphs to kind of follow up on that framing of the theme of what the war was really a conflict of. I guess you're just supposed to gather it intuitively. And that's kind of a problem. He also writes it from the inside, and by that I mean he presumes you have a basic background knowledge of the events and the time period and the technology. So if you're brand new to the idea of World War II, this is probably not a good entry point because there's no even mini biographies of the principal actors within the war to help flesh out the situation, nor is there any background build up to the causes of the war. It's pretty much hit the start button and go. However, if you are familiar with the war, but you want an overall beginning to end arc, tying everything in together, see how events flowed and what event was for what event and what caused that what. Okay, better. So in detail then, unfortunately, he's got a lot of French phrases in here early on for the Battle of France, but most of the French is not translated, at least in the audio. So if you're not familiar with French terms or any of the French language, that's going to throw you off. I think he did the same thing with the Germans. I kind of understand most of the German phrases, so it wasn't a big deal to me. But there you go. Now, he doesn't use Japanese phrases or Chinese phrases when he covers the Far East. So it's kind of leaning you already towards his Eurocentric approach here. And more to say on it in a bit. He does cover Crete very well, but he wrote a book on Crete. So that makes sense. He covers Stalingrad well, but he wrote a separate book on Stalingrad. So that makes sense. One thing in the Pacific, he really covers New Georgia in detail. And that's about it in detail. It's kind of a weird focus for the Pacific Theater. Why would you focus on that small battle there? I don't know, but he spends extensive time there. It's kind of an odd choice. The Sea War, the War at Sea, is, to put it mildly and kindly, rubbish. His coverage of the U-boats is rubbish. His coverage of the Pacific Theater in general is rubbish, but especially the naval aspects. The Midway coverage is complete garbage because he uses Fuchida as his touchstone reference, and that's all he uses. It's craptastic and it's obsolete, outdated immediately. Don't pay attention to it. It's worthless. His idea of Europe being the be-all, end-all of the war is carried out relentlessly. It's like a 9-to-1 ratio for what you get coverage-wise. That's ridiculous. He should have probably just stuck to, hey, this is a general history of the European War. While he does cover some of the politics of the Chinese situation and the Japanese government at the beginning, he's got nothing to say about the colonialism aspect later on. He doesn't mention Churchill's fascination and obsession with keeping the colonial empire intact as a main motivator for Britain's continued participation in the war and their war aims. That's a gross oversight. So there's a lot that he does well within the context of mainland Europe, especially with the resistance movements over the continent, not just in France. There's some good stuff he does with micropolitics within individual nations that are occupied by Nazi Germany. There's some good stuff he does on the Eastern Front here and there in pockets. But like again, he mentions the Einsatzgruppen and their depredations. Well, there's no background explanation of what an Einsatzgruppen is. So if you don't know or don't have a clue, these guys are just wandering around murdering people for no apparent reason. It doesn't really tell you the gist of how killing became just a pastime for the Nazi regime for the sake of killing. Without that deeper background framework, I think you miss out on a lot. I did get some tidbits out of this. It kind of brings a new word to the table here, sniperism, to kind of elucidate the Russian fascination with snipers. That's kind of cool, sniperism. Italian canned meat sent as rations to the North African theater. The Italians and Germans detested it. This would be their version of Spam, but they have some interesting nicknames for it, including Old Man and Mussolini's Ass. That's awesome. He says something about Italian soldiers being dragged to the Stalingrad front in chains, which he did not mention in the Stalingrad book, so maybe that's new info he ran across or couldn't fit into the original book. That's kind of intriguing, but he doesn't follow up on it to explain it. He says sometimes U-boat crews were handed gold watches or fancy watches on the return from successful patrols from mid-war onwards, which I had never heard before. Confiscated from Jewish prisoners, concentration camps, of course. It's kind of odd. Yeah, hand out a watch. Hey, good job getting back to port. Here's your timepiece. Kind of odd, but I guess I can see it. And then there's a General Seydlitz that was captured at Stalingrad. He cooked up a cockamamie plan to insert 30,000 German POWs by parachute, I believe, into Berlin to foment a rebellion and save the Soviets the trouble of conquering Germany. Really bizarre. Never heard of that before. Almost worth a book on its own, maybe. Or at least a magazine article, kind of bizarre. There's a great quote about, I think it was a German soldier in one of the Baltic ports late war. They're trying to evacuate and hold off the Russians from overwhelming them. So there's corpses everywhere. We're walking on corpses, we're sitting on corpses, we're eating on corpses, and there's corpses strewn from here to there in a 10-kilometer swath. Fantastic little quote. Kind of tells you what late war for the Germans was like. And then a nice little nasty tidbit about the Japanese rounding up by force comfort women for GIs who were going to be at the occupation forces of Japan as a means to deter what they presumed was going to be a wide campaign of rape amongst Japanese women. They thought they'd just go ahead and solve the problem for us. Never heard that before. That's a nasty little detail. Somehow got lost in the post-war historiography of the period. Interesting stuff. Overall, this seems like it was a chore for him more than a challenge or desire. Maybe started out with bright hopes of, I want to write my own version of general history of the war and make my contribution, While it never bogs down, it certainly seems like he's far more worried about Europe than anywhere else, which I've said about Norman Davies also. They kind of dismisses the other side of the globe as there's stuff going on over here too. So that's a big downgrade for it. Overall 3 stars, but it leaves out a good chunk of the story. Okay, next up, as a corrective to Bevor's issues with the war at sea, here we go. Craig Simon's World War II at Sea of Global History. This was put out in 2018 to the tune of 647 pages, main body text. And here's better cover art, by the way. This is pretty indicative of where his heart lies, the fast carrier force in the Pacific, and good reason for it. So, Craig Simons has, as I said before, started out as primarily a Civil War writer, but he's drifted into World War II, and he's done some pretty good stuff there, especially the Midway book. Let's cover the highlights here. He's got a really long chapter on the Bismarck saga. It's done very well. Kind of refreshing, kind of bring that up to date, and, good overall perspective on it. I like it. There's a long build-up to the war, start of the war with Japan. which may be necessary for their reasons to commit to it, and our reactions to try to prevent their assault, aggressive behavior, yada, yada, yada. With an important caveat about the oil embargo that I don't know if I've seen before, kind of brushed over before. That was kind of a nice little tidbit of history. He covers Mediterranean very well. He's really fully invested in the naval war in the Mediterranean for good reason. It is crucial. The British lost a lot of ships there and had a hell of a struggle to hold on there, despite the ineffectiveness of the Italian Navy. It could have been a bigger thorn in their side if they had known how to use it at all and were not terrified of losing ships. But then again, the Italian issue with just the supply of fuel oil hampered 90% of what they really wanted to do. But he covers it very well. You know, and then there's a war on trade. He covers that in several different chapters, coming back to it over and over again, kind of linking events here and there. He does a much better job than Beevor of linking events across the globe in time and place. This followed here, this happened at the same time. And, you know, the logistics and industrial demands to make that happen on the Western Allied, you know, industrial capacity, what they could do, what they couldn't do, and the politics thereof, along with the industrial stuff. Does a really good job of linking events across the globe together, far better than Beevor, cause and effect, and why we couldn't do this and why we couldn't do that. Within there is the tyranny of logistics, how logistics abilities and capabilities funneled military action into what we can and can't do, especially concerning Anzio and its potential outcome versus a direct invasion of southern France at the same time as the Normandy landings at 44. All ties together. The choke point of LSTs, the ships that were considered so essential you couldn't get enough of them, within America's gigantic shipbuilding industry, and how even that enormous capacity could not supply enough LSTs at the right time. What he doesn't cover is Admiral King's insistence on military main combatants being produced at the same rate and no cutbacks in that program whatsoever for his 1,000-plus ship Navy that he thought was essential for his status, prestige, and post-war capabilities. That ties in. He did not carry that onto that part of the story. Good stuff, though. And his coverage of the U-boat war is pretty good. Now, he's going to go heavily intense on the losses amongst convoys, hardly ever mentioning those that got through. So he always focuses on the number of ships and the tonnage lost during a convoy battle, but doesn't tell you, oh, okay, out of 90, 10 were sunk. He just says 10 were sunk for X number of tons. That sounds horrible. Or 23 ships were sunk over a 3-night period. That sounds horrible. He doesn't go to do the deeper statistics there, like, okay, but 25 U-boats were vectored onto this convoy, 12 attacked, and 5 got hits, and 1 boat sank for the 6 ships. You know, the detailed stats of their return per U-boat was actually crappy. They could get 2 dozen, 3 dozen boats on a convoy, but their returns per U-boat were generally 1 boat might get lucky, 2 boats might get lucky and conduct 50% or more of the sinkings in a given convoy battle. He doesn't cover that, but overall his coverage of the U-boat war is pretty good. And he does quote Clay Blair, essential. And he does mention, you know, that they never had a chance. He goes on with the cargo ship building program of the United States and Britain, and correctly points out that Germans never had a chance to break the supply to Britain and starve them out, force them to the surrender, to negotiate surrender. Never could have happened. So that's crucial to your understanding of the naval war, at least from my viewpoint. Very strong in the Pacific, obviously. He covers it well. Could have done a little bit more in the kamikazes. I thought he kind of skipped a little bit of that. Could have done more there. A whole lot to say about the atomic bombs. It's in there. It's okay. Overall, very well done. And as I said, a strong corrective to Anthony Beevor's skipping of the whole naval aspect. So that's World War II at Sea by Craig Simons. I recommend that one. Overall General History, Inferno, The World at War, 1939-45, by Sir Max Hastings, from 2011, 651 pages, 5 stars, top notch, can't beat this. As I said in another review, he's a master of the anecdote, and he's really good at rolling them into the narrative as we go, baking it right in. This is a much more full-fledged, robust history of the war, and that he'll give background motivations and evaluations of situations, what went well, what didn't go well, why it didn't go well, what could have been done better, what was utter folly, etc., etc. And especially for early war like Norway and France, he does that extremely well. Kind of brings Norway into the mainstream of the narrative, which you don't normally see, and its centrality to German naval hopes, and later on to Hitler's fixation about the Allies invading Norway and cutting off his Swedish iron ore supplies. Does that very well. He's good on the Battle of Britain and the Blitz, which Anthony Beevor was not, quite frankly. Hastings analyzes the attack pattern and what they did wrong, what could have been done better, and he pretty much comes to the conclusion that they fought the battle in the worst way possible to the most likely conclusion, given that they fought it so poorly with so little forethought. So that might be a bit of a wake-up call for some people that think that the Germans did their damnedest in the best way possible. Nah, Max is like, nope, they bungled it from the start. Malta. In his stuff on the Mediterranean, he talks about the centrality of Malta and how that was the biggest screw-up for the Germans in the war. In the attempt to get Britain out of the war, if you can't invade Britain, your next best hope is the Mediterranean, shutting them off from the Suez Canal, making all the ships go around the long way, forcing them out of Egypt would be the best option along with Malta. Said they went for Cairo and an overland campaign through North Africa. That was essentially doomed because Malta could not be neutralized/taken. He makes that the biggest sticking point. And I understand that. Historians have gone back and forth on that, saying Malta wasn't that important. Malta is that important. Malta's not that important. Max is going to vote on the side of yes, it was. Makes a strong argument for it. I liked it. Let's see. His favorite phrase was turn of the tide. He used it a whopping 7 times throughout the book. I guess the tide really did turn over and over and over again, just like the real tides on the earth. Kind of made my eyes roll a bit. Oh, I forgot to mention Craig Simon's favorite phrase was protocol. He used protocol, I think, like 36 times. And I think sometimes out of context, especially for that era, you wouldn't think the word protocol would come up that much for military operations. You would hear that used more in the 21st century or in a video game or a techno thriller, protocols, the X and X protocols by blah, blah, blah for a book title. I think it really goes overboard, no pun intended for a new history, on the word protocol. So, yeah, that's a detraction from that. Just a little caveat there. And Anthony Beevor's favorite phrase was, in the event or in any case, used again and again. So there's that. 2 other things. As far as overall assessments, bombing campaign. Him and Beevor really have an issue with the strategic bombing campaign of the Allies, more in the Europe than in the Pacific. They both favor the European theater on this issue, saying that was they more or less come down to the moral compass argument that it was wrong. It was a blunt instrument, didn't really affect the outcourse of the war as much as has been claimed. The Air Force's claiming to strategic accuracy and effect were grossly overblown, and they knew it at the time, but did it for the prestige of their own services. And Bomber Harris was a bit mad. Well, we all know Bomber Harris was a bit mad. If you follow the man at all, he was, absolutely obsessed with killing Germans in large numbers in their cities by fire. But the idea of the moral compass here is kind of a contradiction, because him and Beevor both say in their conclusions that we cannot view the war as a good versus evil, right versus wrong event for our current state of morality or Christian beliefs. But when it comes to strategic bombing, they somehow seem that, we were the good guys, and we shouldn't have done that to innocent civilians. It was bad, and we sullied our victory by doing it. even while paying homage to technological imperative. If you got the weapon, you're going to use it. So I think that's a giant problem for both of them, wanting us to not view it in a moral sense, the whole war, except for strategic bombing, which, yes, we shouldn't have done because that was bad, bad, bad. But mostly in the context of European conflict. When it comes down to burning Japanese cities, they don't have such an issue with it. Curious. And I would say the other thing about overall impression is time frame, now versus the future. And that ties into the moral compass thing, too. I think as readers now, not quite 100 years removed from the event, we do want a good versus evil, good guy versus bad guy narrative. If you're in the Western democracies, it makes sense. If the Nazi regime's not evil in an absolute sense, then what is? Stalinism still gets a bit of a free pass, only because Hitler attacked them. But if we can't frame it in our minds as, yeah, this was a necessary evil to stomp out, and it was the right thing to do, if that doesn't make sense to us now, when would it? The most clear-cut case of, yes, this shit is wrong. In Japan, too, for their depredations in China, if what they did wasn't wrong, an absolute moral compass, then what is? So I think they overplay that card egregiously and in the wrong sense. Now, take this story 500 years forward. Will good versus evil matter to readers who are discovering it then? I doubt it. Do we care about the Roman Empire, good versus evil, and all the countries, kingdoms they conquered and the cities they put to the sword? Do we view that within our current moral compass? Not at all. That's ancient civilizations. They did stuff to be doing stuff. That was their warrior ethos. It all makes sense in that system, but we don't attribute good versus bad motivations to them. And I think that'll be true of World War II way distant in the future. But right here and now, I think it does matter. And I think Beevor and Hastings are both wrong in that assessment. That's my take on it. All right, and so till next time, I've found 3 general histories for you. A whole total like 95 hours audio. Hope you found one of those that will pique your interest. And I am General Mark Clark, or as my detractors say, Marcus Aurelius Clarkus. And if I ever find out who those bastards are, I'll demote them immediately to sergeant. Until next time, happy reading.